Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I wonder whether those of you who want to carry on conversations could do so outside. Thank you. I'm Philip Stevens. I'm a columnist at the Financial Times. In this session, we're going to talk about the European economy and its weight in the world. We're extremely lucky to have YVES LETERME here, the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. And we'll be even luckier when that gentleman right at the back there finishes his conversation outside the room. We're going to talk for 15 minutes or so, which is quite a short session, half an hour, and then I'm going to invite comments and questions from you. A lot of the discussions at Globsec have been about, one way or another, about security, but I'm sure everyone in this room knows that security ultimately depends on economic prosperity and the political stability that brings. So what's the future for the European economy? How can Europe leverage its formidable weight in the world? Now, I'm going to start, Yves, that you're a poor rival of the OECD called the International Monetary Fund, a sort of second international economic organization, has come out this week and said that the world divides into three. So we live in a three-speed world. There's the fast-growing economies, the rising economies of the Chinas and the Indias and Brazils, etc. There's a sort of middle rank where economies are growing 2% plus. The US, one or two European nations. And then there's the third tier, which is most of the European continent with slow growth or indeed no growth. Is that our destiny for the foreseeable future?
It's not our destiny, but it's not unexpected that we face in the Eurozone, that we face some problems, that it needs some time to solve problems. And so the fact that we are now most of the countries in the third category of the colleagues and even friends of the IMF is not so surprising. I think you should make a distinction between, on the one hand, the crisis of the money, the price of the money in terms of sovereign debt, or the price of the money which the banking systems needs to produce its services and do its job, on the one hand, and on the other hand, competitiveness and economic growth and structural reform. I think that on the one issue about the crisis of the sovereign debt, because the euro is a very strong currency, but the sovereign signature was in crisis, there was doubt. I think that the fundamental decision has been taken already in May 2008, when we had a European Council. We were sitting there together Friday afternoon, very sunny Friday afternoon, and we decided to do whatever was needed, whatever is needed to defend the euro. But very typical for European decision-making, since then it has been a little bit of muddling through. A kind of financial Schuman doctrine, step by step, and not always very clear what the ultimate purpose was, also reacting on events on the financial markets. But I think a lot has been done. And I think the worst part of the crisis of the price of money, the price of the money banks need and states need to finance their services, is we've passed that. Of course, there still are some countries posing problems and causing problems. We had Cyprus a couple of weeks ago. Last week I was in Slovenia. There are some particular cases which are still quite concerning. But on the other hand, lots of good decisions already have been taken. The six-pack, the two-pack, the whole discussion on the banking union is going on. So that's for the first part. I think we are, with the typically European muddling through procedures and strategy, handling of the problems, we are step by step coming out of a very difficult situation. The second part of the problem, the second problem we are facing is being more competitive, have also an economic union, not only sharing the same currency, but having a real economic union, a real economic integration, and strengthening our competitiveness. There are lots of decisions already have been taken, but there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of work to do.
That seems to me a very good way to sort of to separate these two problems. As you say, on the one hand, the crisis of debt, which you see both sovereigns and in the banking sector, and the other, what was a crisis of competitiveness, our capacity to compete in the world. If we just perhaps stick with that sort of differentiation, we have what someone in Berlin described the other day as a half-built monetary union. And in a way, we're not going to solve the crisis of debt and banking, of sovereign debt, until we complete that monetary union. And we have, as you say, a proper banking union, and we have a mechanism for crisis management, which isn't, as you describe it, just muddling through. Do you think, is it your sense that governments are alert enough to the need for these institutional changes? Or, as it sometimes seems to me, that now the immediate crisis has passed, the momentum for some of these things is being lost?
I think that things have fundamentally changed. I can't recall the exact moment, but I remember that in the wake of the crisis, the banking crisis, I was then Prime Minister of Belgium, and we had problems. We were the first country which was hit by the impact of Lehman Brothers on the continent. And I think Nicolas Sarkozy was then the chair of the European Union, was then president of the rotating president of the European Union. And he gathered a meeting in the Élysée Palace, and together with my Benelux colleagues, we said, well, you know, colleagues, looking into the eyes of the colleagues of bigger countries, bigger European countries, we really need a European approach and European solidarity to fix this problem. These banks are too big to be saved, but not only too big to fail, but to be saved by one single country, and we have to save them together. And there was a kind of reaction well, we now have urgent problems to tackle, and this fundamental discussion, this will take us too much of a time, this will take us too long of a time, let's put it aside. I think since then, we are 4 to 5 years further, and let's say big European countries, medium-sized countries, globally spoken, they have experienced that their sovereign debt, their banking system, can also be endangered by this financial crisis. And so I think that globally the awareness of the fact that we really need a crisis-resolving system, we really need a banking union, we really need more powers for, let's say, the European institutions. I think the awareness has risen, yeah.
But you think there's political will? You think we are going to get a banking union, perhaps after the German election?
Well, it's not up to me to make statements about the importance of the German elections in that procedure, but it's, I think it's the only solution. It's the only solution.
Okay. Let's turn to the competitiveness side. It's pretty clear, and actually I think it's worth saying here, this isn't just a Eurozone problem. I come from a country which congratulates itself for being outside the Eurozone, but has all the same problems, including of competitiveness. When you look at, and the OECD is very good and has pushed the idea of structural reform for a long time, when you look at the sort of decisions that have been made in Spain and in Portugal and in Ireland and in Italy, perhaps, do these measure up in terms of market reforms to the challenge of global markets, to the challenge of places like China and India and Brazil and others who are moving up the value chain, of course, all the time?
I think as a first most urgent step, these decisions were necessary, and one should not underestimate the impact on the unit labor cost, for instance, and on the competitiveness of, let's say, the more peripheric economies. I think in Spain, in Italy, of course in Greece, in some other countries, in Ireland, of course, very tough decisions have already been taken, and they have an impact. They will have a positive impact on the competitiveness of these economies, which were lagging behind. And so they will improve their situation in terms of competitiveness, in terms of unit labor cost, in terms of sustainability of their budgetary fiscal policy. The other part of the problem is that globally, the European economy still needs a lot of structural reforms, and if you give me a minute, I would like to sum up some of the most important needed. I think we should do more in Europe about innovation, entrepreneurship, and let's say the quality of our education, the quality of our research and development. Secondly, we really need to complete the internal market. We think we have an internal market, but there's still a lot of work to do. I think we have to promote worldwide, and of course the transatlantic negotiations will give a good opportunity, free trade, and fix things about, for instance, common agriculture policy in Europe. We have the labor market. We don't have one single labor market, so the mobility on our labor market. And last but not least, I think in the future we have to take more care about social cohesion. We have some problems about social cohesion, but so more innovation, more entrepreneurship, enhancing the mobility on the labor market, completing the internal market, the single market, more social cohesion. These are really essential domains of reform where there is still a lot of work to do.
Okay, so there's an agenda, though, as you say, for global competitiveness. How do we exercise this global weight? I mean, Europe has often thought of itself, and indeed has been, a standard setter, as it were. But it was a global standard setter. But it was much easier when we were a much bigger chunk of the global economy. Now with half GDP coming from the rising world, and certainly the growth, how does Europe continue to act as a standard setter? Does it have to do these, or should it be doing these trade deals with the US and with Japan and with India, if you like, to become a standard setter within a wider framework?
Well, I think we are really at the crossroads. We are really at in the next couple of years, we will decide whether Europe will exist or not exist in very important domains. Because you say, is Europe a global player? I could turn back the question and say, what is Europe in? And enumerate a lot of domains. We are a global player in terms of trade, where the mandate is very clear. It's Europe that negotiates with the United States, and it's Europe that negotiated with South Korea and so on. We have an incomplete internal market, and we are quite, from the European side, well organized in terms of competition policy. Not always application of these decisions, but besides trade and besides competition, Europe is not acting as one single force in really very important domains. And to come back to the start of your question, of course, on 4 to 5 essential topics that are decisive to give or not, let's say, the power and the strength to a continent or to a country, I think we have lots of problems in terms of demography. In a couple of decades, we will only be 6 to 7% of the world population. In terms of GDP, we are now, I think, 20 to 22% of GDP, of the added value worldwide. China 17. In 30 years, it will be 13 for Europe in relative terms, and China will be something like 24, 25%. So that's a game changer. We don't speak with one voice. We are not fully integrated as European Union. And our military expenditure is too low to be really, in the long run, credible enough to be a global player also in security issues. So we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, I just want to roll back a little bit, because one of your sort of list of your checklist for global competitiveness, you mentioned social cohesion, and while it's while the OECD and others can draw up, and governments indeed, intelligent, credible plans to improve competitiveness, while the Eurozone can talk about banking union and getting down fiscal deficits. The question that always arises is, for me anyway, will the politics provide a sufficient time for the economics to work, as it were? So if one goes to Spain or to Italy or Portugal, and indeed to other places, you have a lot of people now saying austerity can't be the answer. And also, we can't all be like Germany, frankly. Not everyone can have a surplus. There has to be a more, if this is going to work, an integrated Europe, there has to be a more balanced adjustment process. There's sort of a more symmetrical process, the sort of argument that we've always had between surplus and deficit countries in international economics. What gives you, do you have confidence that the politics will allow the economics to work?
There's no alternative. There's no alternative, but it's clear that often during the last years, and also I think in these years we are living now, to take the right decisions at the right moment is very difficult from an electoral and democratic point of view. I've seen in the European Council lots of colleagues in solidarity taking decisions that they were sure of that in their country, in their home country, they would be blamed for, and people that have been beaten in elections. But that's the work we have to do for the common sake. But I'm quite sure that there is no alternative for good political decisions. The only question is, will we lose time? And if you lose time, in case you lose time, then you lose momentum and you lose chances for competitiveness in the long run.
But you say there's no alternative, but if you look at some countries, the rise of populist parties of the right and left, if you look at Italy, even the last couple of days, it can't get a government, and it's finding it very hard even to choose a largely ceremonial president. Unless people are persuaded, surely, that there is light at the end of this tunnel, that this isn't, we're not going to have no growth or low growth for the foreseeable future, they won't give their consent, or they'll begin to withdraw their consent, surely. How do you persuade them that this is, if you like, fair as well as necessary?
Well, first of all, it's not surprising that there is a rise of populism. In every period of economic crisis, you see the same events in a more intense or less intense way, and I think it's a mixture of feelings. The first feeling is, it's like reacting when your car doesn't work. You have people that have a look under the motor cap and say, what's happening? But you also have people that just knock on the car. And the populist reaction is just to knock on and instead of looking under the motor cap. You also have people that have a lack of trust towards the political leadership, and sometimes I think they are not completely wrong. So it's a mixture of feelings. But at the end, I think there is no alternative. The only question is the parliamentary democracy, like it is working now, is it really adapted to the expectations created by politicians and expectations of population? At the end, we are not only as politicians the lenders of last resort, but we are also the last people to blame, the ultimate people when something doesn't work. The ultimate people to blame are the politicians, and so it's a difficult period. But also in that field, I think that one, there is no alternative. Secondly, we also have some positive developments.
Okay, look, that's fascinating. So we have to stick with the program. There isn't an alternative. you've set out, I think, many of the central planks of that program, particularly for competitiveness. What I'd like to do now is to ask people here whether, well, you can agree or disagree, or ask questions, or make statements. I'd ask that two things. One, you identify yourselves, and two, you keep it reasonably short so we can get as many people as possible. I've got two gentlemen here and then this gentleman in the second row.
Morning, YVES. Hello. One remark and one question.
Sorry, could you identify yourself? I know who
I'm
you
Diego
are.
López Garrido. I'm a member of the Spanish Parliament, former Secretary of State for European Affairs when Yves LETERME was president of the Belgian government in a very, very difficult times. One remark on structural reforms. We have made in Spain 1 year ago a deep labor reform, the labor market. It was it was a disaster. It was a disaster because a huge flexibility in labor market in times of recession. It's a disaster. We have suffered 1 million unemployed people in 1 year. It's a hit for social cohesion. Then take care of some structural reforms. First remark.
I think I'm going to have to ask you to really keep this short because I've got a lot of people and we've got 5 minutes.
Okay.
So
my question, the same I asked yesterday to Franco Frattini. Is it possible a monetary union without Eurobonds, at least covering 60% of the public debt? Thank you.
Okay. The gentleman next to you, then this gentleman, and then this one, and then we'll...
Andre Nosko, Open Society Think Tank Fund. The first question is related to TINA. There is no alternative. As we've seen, especially in this region and throughout Europe, TINA, or there is no alternative, is actually one of the main reasons why people are disenchanted with politics and they don't trust the politicians. Because if we understand it, we know what is the right thing, but as a politicians, or as a mainstream politicians, we see that we somehow don't have the time to communicate it to the people, and we just forget about the people altogether, and there are other people coming from mainly outside of the political mainstream offering, 2-sentence, 2-minute solutions, easy solutions, completely going against the spirit of democracy as we know it in Europe. So the question is, how can we actually bring the politics back in, get the voters to understand that sometimes the tough and very difficult choices need to be made? How can we regain the political legitimacy for very tough decisions? And then, the second question, the second question is then, we have maintained that the voters can choose, but they have to always choose from the right choices. But democracy is also sometimes about allowing the voters to make the wrong choices. And how can we actually maintain this possibility for the voters to genuinely choose, even if we know that what they are choosing is actually a wrong choice? Thank you.
Okay. This gentleman here in the second row.
Thank you. Miguel Silva for the European External Action Service. I am both a Portuguese and I work in the institutions, so I felt compelled to speak. And I want to speak about alternatives. You said that there was no alternative to further integration in the EU. In the past few months, we've been hearing that there is no alternative to austerity. I believe in that, and I think that most economists would also agree, although it's not consensus. But as far as integration with the EU is concerned, I have seldom heard economists say that there's no alternative. In fact, they say that there are two solutions, both of them radical, which is either further integration or further decentralization in the EU. And those are two real alternatives. So my question to you would be, how would you justify further integration, and how would that solve the problems that have led us to the crisis that we have now, where fiscal centralization, how would that solve the problem, the fundamental problem that there is no labor mobility in Europe, and there are no common work ethics in Europe, the same way that we have in the American market? How would that make a difference? If we think of Mandel's optimum currency area theory and all the parameters that go with it, I don't see how further integration would solve these fundamental structural problems. And if you do believe that further integration is the key, then wouldn't the next step would be a standardization of working languages and working habits throughout Europe, and what would happen to diversity then? Thank you.
What was the last question? I didn't understand the last question.
What wouldn't, for this to work, wouldn't there have to be a standardization culturally, linguistically, for a monetary union to work? But I'm going to keep taking the questions because I think we're only going to get one sort of round from the audience. So I'm going to have this gentleman in the front row here, and then this gentleman over here.
Charles Tannock, member of the European Parliament. Of course, it's complete rubbish. There's no labour mobility in Europe. London has about 500,000 Poles who've come to work in our country, and they've been a boon to the British economy. So there is labour mobility. There may not be enough of it. My question as a politician is an economic fundamental one. How much money can central banks print before inflation kicks in? Because there's not much sign of it, and yet all over the world they've all been doing QE. I gather the ECB actually has done a lot less, funnily enough, than the Bank of Japan or the Fed. And if inflation eventually rears its ugly head, would that actually be a good thing if it was moderate in terms of getting rid of the debt overhang in Europe? Because we've got so much debt. How do we get out of that conundrum of so much debt with fiscal consolidation going on at the same time? Surely a little bit of inflation might actually be quite helpful. But where is it?
And then this gentleman here.
Yes, İlter Turan from Istanbul Bilgi University. Mr. LETERME, if I had listened to you without knowing what your position is, I would have estimated that you're an official of the EU rather than the OECD. And I had hoped to hear maybe from you how this European crisis relates to other members of the OECD. Is there a difference? Is it OECD and EU the same thing? Do you represent the EU or OECD? Thank you.
I think on that last point, I think that's partly my fault because given the time available, I think it was rather me than Mr. LETERME who framed it rather closely in terms of the EU crisis. So I think you perhaps blame me rather than him. But we've got a lot of strong points there about political consent, about the political viability, about can banks keep printing money, and yes, I think how this relates to the rest of the OECD, which is a question I didn't ask.
Thank you very much. I'll try to give answers in a nutshell, so to allow us to end in time. First of all, the question of the Eurobonds. I think in the long run, it's necessary to show the solidarity to have these Eurobonds. But it's the question of the convergence. You can't have Eurobonds before you have convergence. And maybe you need Eurobonds to strengthen, to enhance to stimulate the convergence. So, but to my opinion, when you have an economic and monetary union, when you share the same currency, and when you have the economic convergence, which was a little bit, as far as the importance is concerned, was underestimated since Maastricht. The normal outcome is to have Eurobonds, but it's also normal, once again, that countries that have had a very, in a transparent way, a very, let's say, have stick to the Maastricht criteria, that they want the other countries that need the solidarity, that these countries first show their willingness, their will, and their preparedness to put through reforms that enhance their competitiveness. as far as the questions are concerned about the TINA, the citizens and their belief in politics, their belief in democracy, I think we, as a politicians, we made at least two mistakes. First of all, to present Europe as a kind of promised land, a kind of dream, while it is in between a political level, a level of governance, just as other levels of governance, with sometimes tough decisions to take, with sometimes imposing taxes or taking tough decisions. And so I think what we should do is, but people never vote because they are grateful, but what we should do, amongst others, is to underline what a positive, what a success story Europe is. We are, for the first time in hundreds of years, living in a place in the world where, in this place, where there is no big, important conflict Europe-wide. It's since 70 to 80 years that we don't have the conflicts we used to have during centuries and centuries. Also in this part of the continent, I mean, the rise in welfare, the rise in wealth here is spectacular. We managed to put down the Iron Curtain without big conflicts, and Germany has been successful in integrating East Germany. We integrate the Eastern and Central European economies. We are, I think, stabilizing now the Balkan region with the good decision which was, I think, taken yesterday, or the agreement reached yesterday. So Europe is also a success story, bringing peace, which is essential, bringing more welfare, more wealth to the people. And I think politicians sometimes forget to underline that, and they prefer to blame Brussels when they have a problem in domestic politics. The second question is, of course, a philosophical question about can we further allow people to make mistakes in voting for solutions or against solutions? Well, that's democracy, and I think nobody challenges the fact that it's better to live in a democracy than in a dictatorship, be it that democracy has its flaws also. The question about there is no alternatives, as far as integration and decentralization is concerned, you should have both. I think subsidiarity is a principle which is in the European Treaty, and sometimes it is not, I think, fully used, even not by the European institutions. I think that the logic of the internal market sometimes brought the European institutions, especially the European Commission, to take decisions in parts of the daily life of people where the decision is not always, where it's not always easy to understand why these people from Brussels want to regulate something very specific, a detail. And I think in England, in your country, in the UK, you can give lots of good examples of, and well, mostly good examples of things that are difficult to understand. Integration, decentralization, about wages and salaries. Of course, you can't have, in a sustainable way, an economic and monetary union when you don't have a unit labor cost that converges. When you the price of labor has to converge. Otherwise, you're drifting apart. And also, the mobility on the labor market is essential to have this more equal prices of labor. How much money can be printed without well? I won't elaborate on that, but I would just like to refer to the Maastricht Treaty, where there was an agreement, where there is an agreement about the criteria in terms of debt, in terms of deficit, and in terms of inflation. And I mean, the question about is that the right approach? I think we really have to think about the credibility of our fiscal policy, monetary policy, and this is essential to come out of the crisis. It's right that other economic blocs have made another choice and are making another choice, but that's starting from different situations in reality and in institutional way. Then OECD and EU. Well, the questions were about EU. I can try to answer questions on Japan, on the United States. but you know, we are an organization with 34 member states that are more or less facing the same problems. We are acting quite differently from the one country to the other, but in terms of structural reforms, we are facing almost the same problems, and so I represent the OECD, not European Union, but the questions were mostly about the European Union.
Okay. Fascinating. I think when we come back next year, we're still going to be talking about the European economy, but hopefully an economy that's at least started to grow and has moved perhaps from that third tier, at least up to the second tier. But I think we should thank the Deputy Secretary General for a very illuminating and rich discussion, and thank you for those of you who contributed.
Thank you.
Thanks.